Today we have with us Charlie Clotfelter from Duke. And Charlie's going to be talking about his new book that's coming out this spring. And it's actually out in bookstores, yes, right? And this is really cool. We have flyers and everything out front. And so you're welcome to grab one of these on your way out. Charlie's the Z. Smith Reynolds Professor of Public Policy Studies and a Professor of Econ and Law at Duke. And he's been there since 1979. He's also the director of the Center for the Study of Philanthropy and Volunteerism at Duke and a research associate at NBER. His major research interests are in the econ of ed, the nonprofit sector, public finance and tax policy, and sports in ed, which I guess is econ of ed. So Big Time Sports in American University is being published, well, is published now, and he's the author or co-author of 5 previous books on topics including university economics, school desegregation, and state lotteries. So he's served as vice chancellor and vice provost at Duke, and he's also served as president of the Southern Economic Association. And from 05 to 06, he was a visiting scholar at Russell Sage. So please join me in welcoming Charlie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kristen. Now I've got my little kitchen timer, which I'm going to start, and it's going to end me at about 10 minutes before. So what I'm hoping to do is to stop talking with 10 minutes before. But if you have a clarifying question along the way, I think it'll probably be more interesting just to stop and try to deal with it, or I'll say I'm going to get to that. Or if it's too hard, I'll say that's a very good question. Okay. And I know I'm in an institution that was touched by a guy named John Kane, and some of you knew him, and he was a teacher of mine, and I thought he was a great guy. And we were talking about him this morning, and one of the nice characteristics about John Kane that you don't see often in people with PhDs, especially if they teach at Harvard, is he was a very modest person. Good sense of humor, but he just didn't take himself all that seriously. And that might have been one of the reasons he was so successful in talking to the politicians who had data in Texas. So you can't really start off your sentence by saying, at my prestigious university, this is the way we think. That just doesn't usually work very, very well. Well, I want to talk about universities. This is a project that is really about higher education. I try to tell people it's not a sports topic, it's a higher education topic. But at the end of the day, it looks a little like a sports topic, and I'm hoping that maybe there are some people out there who are sports fans, but the kind of fan I'm appealing for is the person who really loves it, but has got this gnawing feeling that maybe not everything's right about it. And also the person who works in a university and who notices that there is a football program going on and just wonders why did we get into this business in the first place. American universities are distinctive in several ways, but at least 2 ways. Number one is that they are among the best universities in the entire world. There is a ranking put out by a university in the Shanghai area that is probably the best known, and it ranks the top universities in the world, and of the top 20, 17 are American universities. So that's one characteristic, is that they are very good, and among all the things that we do in this country, this might be one of our strongest industries. It's certainly one of our biggest export industries. And export in higher education appears when somebody from another country comes to one of our campuses to study. The second characteristic of American universities is that there are no universities, no other country in the world has universities with commercial sports entertainment businesses inside them. If one of these programs were to be on its own, the Commerce Department statisticians would probably classify that business as part of the entertainment business. Yet there it is in the university. So I want to begin by talking about what a weird thing it is to have this thing in a university, and then say a little bit about the problems that we have been seeing with these universities. Well, some of them are quite obvious, and it could be as Barry Zeldin just suggested, maybe it's just because of March Madness, but there have been a number of issues that have been raised in the last week, some of them by specials that have been on television, others just because the news came up. We have a report yesterday that several players, football players at Auburn University, say that they were paid. This is not in accordance with the rules. That the nonprofit organization that runs one of our most famous bowls, the Fiesta Bowl, has been using their money to pay for going to weddings and paying for contributions to local politicians. And these things are not even legal. And so there's a number of headlines that we've seen in the last year that have made you think that maybe college, big-time college sports is not the cleanest thing going on. But of course, then, you know, we think about all the many hundreds, tens of thousands of Division III athletes that are going about their business, playing, you know, going to fencing matches and also studying. And so what we're seeing perhaps is the tip of a certain iceberg. So what I wanted to do is to try to convince you that there are these two entities within certain universities in this country. It has to be a university. The ones I looked at were universities that had football at the highest level, which means the football bowl subdivision. There were only about 100 some odd universities in this, used to be called Division 1A. And then I only look at those universities, and I only look at the top, these revenue-making sports, football and men's basketball. So I begin with a picture of let's see, maybe let's go down. Now I've gone too far. Okay, that's what I want to start with. This is the Nanoscience and Technology building at UT. Anybody know this building? Have you seen this building? Okay, it's a building, and inside it are, nano means very small, so for social scientists like me, it's smaller than you can imagine, but they are dealing with very little things that might have very big implications. You have mechanical engineers, you have chemical engineers, you have biochemists working in this. Some of the departments at UT Austin that are represented in here are world class. They are doing research that's known the world over. And that represents this idea that American universities are at the top in one of the functions of universities that is well known. What do we say we're about? We're about research, teaching, and service. That trinity describes virtually any American university, those three things. But about 10-minute walk away is a picture of another building at a UT. In fact, Kurt's daughter has right out here. So she's got one of these very distant locations. But I like this view because it shows from the fans' perspective what this other thing is. I think I have another picture of the Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. So anyway, so that's the other thing. And what I tried, this is how I start the book off, is to compare these two buildings. And what they represent is really two different worlds in American universities. Now, these two different worlds don't happen in every university. They don't happen here. They don't happen at MIT. They don't happen at Caltech because they don't have this other thing. So at most universities like this one, we have the three objectives. We don't have this commercial thing going on. And the idea of my book was to say, what explains this? If you were from another country, let's say you were a European, and you were over here visiting the University of Michigan or UT Austin, and you were being shown around, you would be led around by a professor like me, maybe, who would say, these are our objectives: research, teaching, and public service. And then you'd come to the Darrell K. Royal Stadium, and your visitor would say to you, what is this doing here? And that was really what I tried to do in this book. And I came across some interesting paradoxes and dilemmas that occur to you when you begin to realize, one, how big this is, and two, how little we acknowledge its importance. And that is kind of one of my lessons. In the book, I'm trying to chide my fellow faculty members and administrators to say, wait, this is a big thing. So part of what I'm going to do is to talk about, is this a big thing or not? Oh, there's one more room in the stadium that I want to show you. This is the locker room. And it's got 5 flat screen TVs, and it's got 125 lockers and everything. But it's topped off by a 20-foot long light in the shape of Longhorn. So this is just one of the aspects of big time sports that shows there's 2 different worlds in our universities. Now, here's my list of the top 20 universities in the world according to Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and then I've also put University of Texas. So Texas weighs in at number 39, which is not too bad. This is pretty good ranking. And look at the kind of universities. What you see is USA. All you see is 3. You see Cambridge, you see Oxford, maybe Oxford and Tokyo. So those are your 3. So that's really what shows that first demonstration. But now I'm showing you here, among those very top universities, the characteristic of these yellow-colored universities is that they all have big-time sports. And again, what I'm talking about is you really have to have a football team that plays at the top level of competition. Notice that the majority of those are in the Pac-10, but that's just something I noticed recently. So nobody from the ACC or the Southeastern Conference are in that. Now, so what I want to do is, here are the main points. I want to start by saying, what do the experts say about this whole enterprise? They say, not much. But then I say, that doesn't make sense compared to what we observe on the ground. If you have been at a university with a big-time sports program, you will not say this is the same order of magnitude as dining halls or the drama program. Okay, and then third, and then I'm going to give you my explanation about why do these universities have it anyway. Talk a little bit about the cost. I want to say something good. This book, I didn't try to constrain it to be good or bad. I sort of thought it would be more negative when I started off. And it turned out to be a little bit, it's kind of a mixed bag. That's what I come out with at the end. And so that's sort of made everybody a little bit unhappy with me. And then I think I probably won't say anything about the research topic. So, all right, so this is what the experts say. Now, one of the things I did, I looked for data in every corner I could. And one of the things I asked myself was, what do universities say about big-time sports? So I went to their published mission statements. Almost every university has a mission statement. Why this happened would probably be a good study in the sociology of knowledge. I think it came from corporations that, their trustee members said, why don't you have a mission statement? Okay, we'll get one. And so they have them. Some of them are quite short, and some of them are very long, like Duke's is very long. Some of these mission statements mention things like specific things like nanoscience or the library school or the law school. And some of them don't mention it at all. What I found, so I looked at 58 universities that are members of one of the top 5 conferences, Southeastern Conference, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-10, and plus Notre Dame. So 58 universities. So these are all certifiably big-time sports universities. Out of that 58, 52 of them have mission statements. How many do you think mentioned big-time sports or even athletics? 5. So only 5. And I thought, that's a pretty low number. They all mention research, they all mention teaching, and almost all of them mention service. But I think, well, maybe some of them are just very short. Like the University of Alabama's is a very short one. We believe in those 3 things, and that's it. So I said, if So what I wanted to say is, given that you have something, what's the chance that you'll mention it in your mission statement? And it turns out that if you have an extension service, agricultural extension, which I don't know if Texas does, but Texas A&M probably does because it's the land-grant college. Okay, so every state has at least one land-grant institution. And so it's over 30% of those that with an extension service mention it. If you have a vet school, the chances are over 15%. And if you have let's see, a law school, where is that? Law school is about 15% as well. The least likely thing that you will mention is that you have an athletics program. And only 5 out of the 52 are that. So, and we can talk later about who the 5 are that do it. But in my mind, they get on an honor roll because they're honest about really what they're doing. All right, so here's a few measures of the fact that it's big, and maybe in Texas I don't need to really make this point, but if I were giving this talk at NYU or at Williams, I need to persuade them that there are parts of this world where college sports is a big deal. Okay, so you just, but in my neck of the woods, and here I suspect I don't have to do that. But so what I try to do is, again, I'm trying to get numbers. So I'm just looking for numbers. Here's just the amount of money that the athletic department spends. The top in 08-09 was UT Austin at $113 million. So that's the value. That's their expenditures in their athletic department. Duke is 71 million. Okay, here's another thing. All right, how prominent are these? Well, one of the things you find out is that newspapers cover sports. Well, I said, what's the most serious newspaper in the country? What's the newspaper that takes itself most seriously? What's the newspaper that's most likely to cover the latest invention or student unrest or maybe faculty protest? It's the New York Times. So I went and I had research assistants do this. I want to look at all of the newspaper articles about any of these 58 universities, any of them, and then ask the question, was it about sports? Now, if Joe Jones was marrying somebody and Joe Jones had been a graduate of Duke, that would not be counted. But if there were fire at a Duke building, if there were a protest there, if a Duke professor had found out something or written a book, that would all be in there and would be a non-sports story. Then the other were sports stories. Question, what percentage of the New York Times articles about these 58 universities were about sports? Answer, 87%. And just to make sure it wasn't a new phenomenon, I went back 40 years to 1967. It's about the same. And I went down another 40 years back to 1927, and it was about the same thing too. Now on the other side, I took 16 universities without big-time sports programs, except Georgetown is in here, which is a little bit of a ringer. And the majority of those stories is about non-sports stories. So one thing is the newspaper coverage. To be a little bit more modern, I thought, well, maybe, what about Google hits? Who gets more Google hits, your university president or your football coach? Okay, so that's one way of measuring. And to do this right, I allow different possibilities. So I would put the middle initial in or out. For each university, I would search for either, say, Clemson or Clemson University, and did the combinations with quotes around each. And I used the one that had the most hits. Okay, and so what I found out is that the football coach wins, and the ratio is phenomenal. It's a 7-to-1 ratio. So the football coach gets an average of 7 Google hits for every 1 that the president does, compared to these universities, the 16 that without the big-time programs, their presidents are more prominent. On basketball, it's a little bit closer. So, and because some of these without the big-time programs, they're more like, they might be in Division I basketball, like Harvard and Princeton. So that would be a case in which those universities' sports programs might be a little bit more prominent. Another thing is that high school players, 18-year-old high school players who are very good and are recruited by colleges, they get their own nationally televised press conference. Here's a high school player who decided not to play for this university, but instead chose the rival University of North Carolina. He had his press conference in his high school gym at Ames, Iowa. And the country was breathless to know where Harrison Barnes was going to go. Another example, and what I'm trying to do is to say, this is really a big deal. How much are these coaches how much are they getting paid? Because we know in this country that's a measure of importance. So what I did, and I searched high and low, this was hard to find, but I got, for 44 public institutions, I had salary and compensation information for football coaches, for presidents, and for full professors. And I tried to make it comparable in that if health insurance was not in there, I put in an estimate of health insurance, I put in an estimate for retirement, to make these comparable. Then I put them all into constant dollars. And what I find is that over the period 1984 to 2000, I think 8, 10, we'll see in a second, full professors' real income went up, compensation went up 32%. So we're feeling pretty good. Full professors' real compensation went up 32%. Presidents went up 90%. So presidents are being compensated much more. But football coaches, 7.5 times. Read my lips. 7.5 times in real dollars. Football coaches' compensation went up 7.5 times. Presidents almost doubled. Full professors, 32%. So now you can take a ratio to say the average football coach makes, well, it's going to look like 3 or 4 times what the average president makes at these institutions. So again, that's an estimate, an idea that these are big deals. I can give you there's marketing information that shows that a fairly high percentage of adults either watched a game in person, listened to one on radio, or watched one on TV. So let's take the Atlanta market. I grew up in Atlanta, and I was a Georgia Tech fan. And it looks like 29% of these, this is basically the metropolitan area of Atlanta, 29% of adults in a survey say, I did one of those things. That's a high percentage. So Georgia Tech gets a great deal of exposure in this way that its other functions don't get. But go to look at the University of Georgia, it's over 40%. And if you really want to see a big number, look at Birmingham. In Birmingham, 72% of people watched an Alabama game. Oh, and there's a little factoid about, again, I'm trying to say this is a big deal. Every year, football teams have a spring scrimmage. It doesn't count for anything. They have spring sports, according to my friend who used to play football at a big-time place. That's the most dismal time because all you do is practice and you don't play games. But there is one game at the end. It's usually an inter-squad game, so our team is the Whites versus the Blues. They play, and it's a scrimmage game, and then everybody goes home, and that's the end of spring practice. Last spring, about this time, at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, a small town, how many people went to the spring scrimmage game? The answer, 91,000 people went to this scrimmage game. I mean, just think about 91,000 people went to a game that was a practice game. Okay, so it's a big deal, especially in some parts of the country. Again, this doesn't happen in New Jersey as much as it does in Louisiana. There is a regional component. One other thing, and this touches universities directly. There is a great deal of talk every year about, 3 weeks ago, at the beginning of March Madness. And we all think about the number of people that are gathering around their water cooler at their office place because they're filling out their brackets. The day before, it's called Selection Sunday. That's when a committee decides who's going to play. This year, it's 68 teams. Their brackets. If you have not seen a bracket, then you been awake the last few, because they're everywhere, okay? All right, so, and the first few days, that's when you're filling them out, and now it's all become computerized, so it's part of, you fill them out, you give your dollar or you don't give your dollar, and you can do it nationally, you can do it in your workplace. And I wanted to see, and there are even estimates about how much lost time there is. But somebody, on the back of an envelope, they said, well, it's probably 100 minutes, or we multiply the number of people, and you get this tremendous thing. So is there really a measure of how it affects work? And I scratched my head for several weeks about this and came up with the following, is that in universities, if I say the name JSTOR to this group, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Now, I've had to explain that to a lot of people who are not in universities. And what I was able to do was find out that JSTOR keeps data for every library on daily use, measured several ways. The way I tried to use, the measure I tried to use was number of articles viewed. Now first I tried number of articles downloaded, but apparently there are macros where you can run these things and download lots and lots of articles overnight. And so I'd see these blips. What I wanted was the number of articles that you actually click, you see the PDF, and then you can decide to print it or not. Or you can just read it a little bit, okay? And so it's a number of articles viewed. And in most university libraries, this can be in the thousands. A small one, it could be in the hundreds. But I had to get permission from each library for me to do that before JSTOR would sell me the data. So my university librarian agreed with me, and she was on committees for 2 associations. She sent out an email saying, this wonderful researcher at Duke wants to do this study, would you give us permission? And I wrangled with them. Some of them didn't want to give their name, but most of them, they were not going to get burned by this. 78 libraries said yes. So, and I did it for 3 years, 2006, 2007, 2008. I did it for 3 months, February, March, and April, to see if there was any correspondence between these patterns. And given you've got so many observations, you can run a lot of regressions. But the first one is just a diagram. And this is the average, the relative average use of JSTOR by week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And what you'll notice is that the number of articles viewed over the semester tends to go up. Now, if a school was on break, I dropped that observation. But everything else it's how the usage of that day refers to, is as a percentage of the average week, or it might have been the average February. So basically, everything starts with 100, and then you average those up. And this is what happens. And notice that there are 3 separate years that I'm looking at. And what you find is that does go up over the year, but in each year, there is a distinct drop after Selection Sunday. So the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, after Selection Sunday, it's just lower. Now this is based on research libraries, which includes the New York City Public Library, but mostly these are university libraries. But I would venture to say, if you did work at law firms, you'd see the same thing. If you had work in the insurance company, in the IT industry, you'd see the same thing. There is this bump down. Now, is that because, is the result, is the conclusion that we're losing productivity? I don't think so. Not necessarily. We could be. It could be that this makes the workplace a happier place to be, and it might increase productivity. But what it does show is that this media event, which is big-time sports, has such a hold over the lives of people that you can see it statistically. I also run regressions to do this, and just for your interest, so what you also find is that usage is down the entire tournament by a little bit. It's down especially the first week. It's down as long as your team is in the tournament. Now, parenthetically, the biggest hit is on Super Bowl Sunday. So Super Bowl has the biggest hit. Easter Sunday, I wanted to put that in there, that's down a little bit, but not as big as Super Bowl Sunday. But the other thing I wanted to do is, and this is really the only causal estimate in the entire book, the only thing that could actually be published in an economics journal, was what is the effect of unexpectedly losing or winning a game? So I looked only at the usage for libraries whose teams were in the tournament. and unexpectedly won or lost. Now, I define that as if you were involved in an upset, or if the team was, the outcome was so close to be 2 points or less in spread that you would be surprised, you were not anticipating winning or losing. I figured that if a team like University of North Carolina that usually wins in the early rounds, if they win, it's not going to be unexpected, so it shouldn't have an effect. So what I found is that to win a game, to have your team win a game unexpectedly, was a 25% decline in work the next day. The day after the next day, there was still significant, about 5%. But after that, no effect. And to lose unexpectedly, no effect at all. So the only thing here is that if your team wins unexpectedly, it's time to party and get ready for the next game. So that's what we found there. A couple more indications of how big this is. I'm going to skip this one. This next one is one of the things that's happened with big-time college sports is that it's on TV much more. This is the first weekend in October, the number of football games on television in the Chicago market. In 1983, there were exactly 2 games on. There was the CBS Game of the Week, Alabama-Penn State, and there was this upstart cable station out of Atlanta, WTBS, was doing one too. But after 1983, there was a Supreme Court decision ruling saying that the NCAA could not monopolize this. Before, if you wanted to be on television, you had to get permission from the NCAA, and they just didn't want to have that many. Well, so after that, look at the number. It goes up, and now look at the number. It goes up again. What's happened here is not only the Supreme Court decision, but something called cable television. And so it's now, you're the unusual big-time team if you don't get on television a few times. And some, of course, are on television every week. In basketball, the basketball players are ubiquitous on the television. I'm sure that the starting guard of our team last year was on TV as much as President Obama, because they played, the average team is on 27 times a year. 27 times a year is a lot. Okay, so of course they are not all national and televised. The current tournament right now, these are inflation-adjusted amounts of revenue that the NCAA makes from this tournament. It has been going up. The red is the TV revenue. The blue is the tickets sold. And so it's a big money maker. And as Kurt and I were talking about, this is the major, if not the only, source of revenue for the NCAA. So they take this money and they use it for all divisions and for all the activities. A couple of just noteworthy things about big-time sports. Here's some evidence on who is a fan. It turns out that men, and the blue is football, the yellow is basketball. Men are more likely than women. This is relevant because if you're an advertiser, you want to pay attention to who's watching your games. Actually, college grads watch more than non-college grads. The fans are relatively affluent. There's a little bit more in the South than in the rest of the country, and for some reason Republicans like this more than Democrats. And there's another political angle that'll come up again. This is college football per capita. Notice the heavy attendance in college football is in the southeast, or maybe west southeast, and part of the Midwest. You can go back and look at the history of college football and notice that it grew up and was strong in places where professional football was not strong. Professional football was confined mostly to the Northeast and Upper Midwest, a little bit to California. And I would say for two reasons: because trains took a long time to get very far, and because of racial segregation laws in the South. The South was not ready for racially integrated teams. And maybe this is a good time just to say a word about the history of big-time sports in the South. It could be the University of Texas might have had the last all-white national championship football team. At least my research assistant, who's a UT grad, says that. But it was the case that the universities in the Southeast that had been predominantly white were white by law. And then through the struggles and legal battles of post-1954, they became integrated over time. But there was a great struggle in the South. And for those of you who are too young or didn't follow this, the South did not give up de jure segregation easily. But the way I look and talk about it in the book is that there were two great institutions in the South. And one of them was segregation, and the other was football. And in some real sense, football won, because the teams that had been all white, the universities that had been all white, realized that they were going to lose games. And if they played USC in Michigan, they were going to lose games if they didn't integrate. And so it could have been in self-interest, who knows? But it had an effect. So that when, in 1958, when Georgia Tech, my team, was invited to the Sugar Bowl to play Pittsburgh, the governor of the state, Marvin Griffin, said, that's an integrated school. If they come down and play in New Orleans against our lads, they're going to have black people sitting with white people, and we can't have it. This is Armageddon. We have to stop this thing. He goes to the regents and said, we've got to get our Georgia Tech, which is a public school, we've got to get them out of the Sugar Bowl. What happened then was that the all-white student body marched on the governor's mansion, burned him in effigy, because they wanted to play the game. So this is certainly not as important as other factors, but I think it probably had some effect. Now I'm going to, all right, so I've got 8 minutes, but well, we'll see. And then a couple of other just interesting aspects I think are interesting. Here's a little bit about the finances of big-time sports. And what I did here is I picked 5 representative universities in 5 groups. And so let me say, this is the Texas group. These are so I have 5 conferences here, and then I have 6 conferences here. These are lesser conferences, so the Big East doesn't want to be over here, but they are. But this is those 5 that I mentioned. And I took the most successful of each of the 5. Ohio State was the one with the biggest number in Big Ten. Texas, these are examples. In ACC, it was Florida State. So there are 5 universities here. Another 5 here, and I call them the also-rans. They are kind of the worst in each of these, but these are big conferences. Then over here, we get the smaller conferences, and these are the ones that whoop up on everybody. They're the most successful. And these are the ones that are the lowest of the low. They are the worst in these small conferences, but there are even conferences below it. So there's a pecking order, so I have these 4 groups, and what's interesting is to just compare them. What's the attendance like? Well, the attendance is like the Darrell K. Royal is about 100,000. So these are very high attendance games. But if you get down to the Mississippi States of the world, it's much smaller. But you get down to the top universities in these others, they're even smaller. And then the Southern Mississippi, they're very low. It corresponds to the amount of money. Look at how much the football coach makes. 3.1 million, 1 million, almost a million, 700,000. So that corresponds. Now, to me, the most interesting part of the table is what's their most important source of revenue? The major powers, you might think it's ticket sales or TV. No. The most important, it's very close. is charitable contributions. How do you get charitable contributions? You say, you want a 50-yard line seat at Ohio State? Well, you know, we sell them, but, you know, we're sold out. But I want one. Well, if you'll make a contribution to the Athletic Association, we'll see what we can do. And in fact, it's not even that loose. There's a chart that says this is how much you give. So if you want the right, so if I wanted to move to Durham, North Carolina and have the right to buy 2 tickets to see Duke basketball in their little bitty gym, which would cost me about $1,000, I'm sorry, there's no tickets available. But if you would give us an annual check of, now get ready for this, $7,000. That's all, $7,000 annual contribution. You'll have the right to buy those $1,000 tickets. So contributions turn out to be very important. This was a big surprise to me. And oh, by the way, this is tax deductible. So if you're interested in policy, why do we give a tax deduction for charitable gifts? Because we think that there's some kind of charitable or educational function. But if you believe that this is a purely commercial enterprise, you might wonder why we're giving a charitable deduction for that. For these groups, for the NC States of the world, they're in a good conference, but they're not winning. But because the money that goes in these conferences, they're distributed like, it's sort of like the Swedish welfare system. Everybody gets part of it. And so they, in fact, they do well because they're getting money from conferences. But down here, you have to balance your budget on the backs of students. And you have inordinate student fees or sometimes direct subsidies. So this is a great deal has been made of this recently, in that when you get down to the Ohio universities, to that kind of university, Toledo, you're going to have to balance on the back of students a great deal. What else? The students that go to big-time sports universities tend to be more affluent than the ones that go to these are the commuter schools. So this is the Georgia, this is the Georgia State. This is the Michigan, I'm sorry, these are privates. Here, this is the Michigan, this is Wayne State. So those who go to big-time sports universities tend to be more affluent, and they're more likely to have gone to private school. They're more likely to live on campus. So are you going to live at home? If you're at a private university and you're going to big-time sports university, no way. And in the publics, it's, again, the commuter schools are the second ones. I'm going to skip over that. This is a comparison between 4 private selective universities with big-time sports. So think about Rice, Stanford, versus 4 universities that are private selective that don't have big-time sports. Think about Chicago or WashU, okay? And the question is, how do they use their time? Well, it turns out that the students at these similarly selective universities, pay attention, Kurt, is that the ones that go to the big-time sports universities spend less time in class and spend less time studying, more time in organized activities. So now, is that a result of the sports? No, it could be complete a selection effect. So you all are studying things, you worry about selection effects. That could be entirely a selection effect. So I'm not saying it's a causation. But the other correlation is that they're also more likely to do binge drinking. All right, I don't have much more time, so what I want to do is give you a couple more things. This is how they classify their overall rating. Again, these are private universities, those are public universities. The first one's had the big-time sports, the second one doesn't. Would you definitely go to this institution again? This is so-called endorsement question that's asked. This comes from a group called COFI. This comes from the NESI, which is a national survey that just public universities. Those who went to big-time sports universities are more likely to say they'd do it again. So that might indicate that they're happier. Was your overall experience excellent? It's kind of a mixed bag. I would interpret this as saying the evidence isn't all that super strong that the students at these big-time sports universities are happier. I want to do just a couple more things. One thing I did, and I don't really know what to do with these findings. There's a theory out there that there's something called a booster coalition. And the boosters kind of control the university at a big-time sports place, and that they control things. And I think there might be something to this, but I wanted to say, is there any evidence out there? And one of the implications of the booster idea is that the boosters are going to capture the athletic department and that the athletic department people are going to start looking like the boosters, not like the rest of the university. I compared. Well, it turns out you can get voter registration information in certain states. And what I decided to do is compare universities that were in the big time football versus ones that weren't in the big time. But I had to settle on Division I. So basically I was doing something like Boston College versus Harvard. And I paired these by state because I'm looking for the percent who are Republicans. So I could have done the percent who are Democrats. I just decided, is there a difference in their political orientation? And so then I did it for 5 groups of stakeholders. Econ faculty was one. Administrators who are doing finance and things like that. Trustees, those who work in the athletic department, and boosters. And boosters, you had to be a member of the booster organization. And it turns out that there's no significant difference between these two types of institutions except for boosters. And boosters in the big-time sports places are more likely to be Republican. So so I had state fixed effects in here, holding all that stuff constant. If you're a booster in the booster organization, you're more likely to be a Republican. What does that say? I don't know. All I know is that it corresponds with this idea that there's a booster coalition, but it doesn't support the idea that the boosters have made the athletic department different, because there's no difference in the Republican percentage among athletic department folk. The least likely to be Republican in this group are econ faculty. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is one aspect of cost. In this book, I talk about the good things and the bad things and the ugly things in university sponsored big-time sports. And I do talk about some of the good things that people, I don't think, have paid much attention to. And 2 of them are spillovers. And in econ, we think of spillovers as public goods that you don't really get any benefit for. These 2 spillovers that I identify, or one is that, you see, I might even have a picture. You don't need to have a picture. Is that it makes people happy. People have pride. Somebody's a UNC, somebody's a Nebraska fan. They wear their red, they wear little things in Nebraska. They have their Kansas Jayhawk on their hat. It makes them feel good. And when Kansas wins, they are happy. When they lose, they're sad. But there's happiness. And even economists think happiness is important. And the other thing that is I think a good thing is that big-time college sports, and I'm going to stop in just a second, we'll have at least 5 minutes. The other thing that big-time college sports does is it provides an example of interracial cooperation. We have, again, if you haven't studied your American history, you will not know this, but if you have, you will, that this country has had the shame of having slavery. It has had the bad fortune to have had a Jim Crow system, and it still faces the legacy of discrimination by race. One thing that big-time college sports allows is for people to see individuals that don't look like each other, not only getting along with each other, but cooperating for an important end. So when you see high fives, you see fist bumps, it's got a message that's a good message. So I take both of those as positives. Now, would you be able to get those benefits if you didn't spend so much money? Probably you would. But as it is, that's a benefit. But then I also talk about the costs, and the one I'll end with is something about free expression. Now, in universities, we take it to be a matter of principle that we should allow people to express themselves freely. We do have constitutional strictures on this. You can't say fire in a crowded theater because that might cause a riot. You can't joke about bombs at an airport security. These are restrictions on free expression. But otherwise, in our universities, we encourage people to be free and say things. In big-time college sports, we have made an important restriction on free speech, and I want to show you a picture that illustrates it. And that'll be the last thing. I've got a couple of complaints about the way big-time sports is regulated. Yeah. Here's the illustration. So we have two football players. It's about a year old. One player is named Mark Ingram. He was a junior when this was taking place. Unfortunately, he played his senior year, and then when they came to Duke, Mark Ingram ran all over our team. But that's another thing. But what you see on his jersey are two things: the SEC, which is his league, and then this swoosh, which I think most people could identify. That's a corporate logo. Mark Ingram is wearing that, and it's not because he wants to, it's because he has to. Because his university has signed a contract with a Nike corporation that says all the players it will wear the Nike swoosh. If they happen to have an injury that requires taping over that, you've got to get permission. Otherwise, no hiding that thing. And the size of it is specified. So Mark Ingram, the answer is has to, must wear that, okay? Now, here we have another player who was a player, now he's a pro, and he was one of several players who took to writing things on the little black thing under your eyes. The first person that did it, I think, was putting his zip code, and then other people put other things. But this guy named Tim Tebow, he would just always write Bible verses. And this one is Psalms 23:1, which is a well-known statement that is significant in two great religious traditions. That is now forbidden. So because the NCAA said we don't want to worry about all these different little messages. And anyway, the irony, the deep irony, is that players are required to wear this corporate symbol. They are forbidden to wear anything that expresses their beliefs or feelings. So I think there are some interesting issues to deal with, but and let me leave it there. And I haven't left you 10 minutes. I've left you a few minutes for questions.
How does the NCAA get like a monopoly? Isn't there some kind of antitrust violation? Because I remember they have a lot of political power, like telling University of Illinois they have to change their mascot if they want to be in the tournament. And so it would seem that this goes back to some of these issues. But then the second question is, what is your advice for a school like here, where we're just starting? It's a new school. Should we go down the path of pursue big time sports, or follow like MIT, Caltech, and stay away from that and just focus on academics? Is it worth it?
So on the second question, I would say refer to your local experts, and so Gert will he'll probably have good opinions about that. I will say, and I won't answer the second one because that's too hard a question. But I will say that a number of universities like this one are getting into football when people all around say, "What are you thinking? You're going to have 85 scholarships. You're going to have all these coaches and assistant coaches. You're going to have to spend all this money, and Title IX is going to make you. You're going to have to find things for 85 women to play too. You don't want this." They're doing it anyway. Why? Because they think that the prominence that it will bring them is worth it. And we have a campus at UNC in Charlotte that's doing that precise thing. The first one is a legal question having to do with the NCAA. I made several decisions at the beginning of this project that I wouldn't study, and I'm glad I did all those. I said I would only look at two sports, because I only wanted to look at the most commercial sports. I would only look at one division. I would look at the top. And I wouldn't get into minutia of NCAA because I would never come out of that. And it would be easier for me to go to rabbinical school and learn all about the Talmud than to do that. So I don't have any knowledge about it. Yes?
So you presented a lot of interesting numbers about the effect of the sports program on the sports program, and for instance, the ability to garner donations into the athletic program and things like that. So what I was curious about is whether any of your analysis focuses on the effect of these sports programs on the other missions of the university, for instance, donations to the general mission.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to look at. And to a large extent, I relied on other good research. If a good study had been done, I just cite it. I'll start with donations and say a word about admissions. In donations, there are some studies, and they suggest that being good in sports will bring additional donations. There's more uncertainty about how those are going to be split between the athletic and the non-athletic, but I believe that they do raise donations for non-athletic sources. One of the things I did, another bit of information I decided to use for this, was to use freedom of information laws in the different states to find out who were the guests, VIP guests at football games. And so one of the universities is Texas A&M. I don't do it for UT. That's all to say I think that there are effects in donations, but also in political support. It's hard to measure these things, but I think the evidence would suggest that a public university that is having a big-time sports presence and is doing decently, it's good for its support from the legislature. Now, tell that to Wisconsin. I don't know, these are tough times. As far as applications, there's very good evidence to suggest that success in both football and basketball bring more applications. So there's a little bit of that. Well, I may be out of time.
Okay, well, great, thank you. Okay, so thanks all for coming. We're going to have in May our next seminar on the 6th. It'll be Tim Diet, who was originally scheduled for February, and he got caught up in bad weather in North Carolina. So he'll be coming on May 6th to give a talk.
We don't have bad weather.
About well, how did that work? Do immigrants impact the test scores of non-immigrants? Lessons from North Carolina. So we look forward to seeing you back here on May 6th, and thank you very much for coming.